joining us for today's webinar, Opioid Affected Youth Initiative. My name is William Moore, and I'm with OJJDP's National Training and Technical Assistance Center. As your technical host, I would like to take a couple of minutes to discuss a few features of the Adobe Connect webinar platform and provide a few announcements to keep in mind. Please note that today's event is being recorded and it will be published on OJJDP NTTAC's YouTube page. The webinar recording will be archived in approximately 1 week on OJJDP's NTTAC YouTube channel, where you can also view past webinars. For the transcript of the event and supporting materials, please contact OJJDP NTTAC Help Desk. For those wishing to download a copy of the PowerPoint presentation and other important documents, you may do so by locating the handouts pod directly above the chat area. Here, you will also find a FAQ for webinar participants that will likely address any technical related issues. Click on the file name and then click the download button. At the end of today's webinar, there will be a Q&A session where the presenter will address some of the questions posed during the presentation. Please type your questions into the chat box as they arise. For those of you participating in today's webinar as a group, please take a minute to help us count. Go to the chat window and type the total number of additional people in the room with you today. If you are viewing alone, there is no need to type anything into the chat pod at this time. And at the conclusion of today's webinar, you'll be provided with a link to a brief survey about today's presentation. The feedback you provide is used to assist in future planning and training. Also, following today's webinars, attendees will be sent a certificate of attendance. The certificate is sent approximately 1 hour following the conclusion of the event and is sent via the Adobe Connect thank you email. Please keep an eye out for your email for the certificate. Again, thank you for joining us today. I will now turn it over to our presenter, Ms. Kathy Mitchell, Program Manager with Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention. Kathy?
Thanks, William. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the webinar today. This webinar will provide a brief overview of the 2018 Opioid Affected Youth Initiative. Some of the objectives we will go over include eligibility, the narrative, the application process, and then we'll have a brief discussion about the different categories. So we are very pleased at OJJDP to have been appropriated over $7 million by Congress to respond to the opioid epidemic. And out of that appropriation was the development of this new youth initiative. Its goal is to assist states, local governments, and tribal jurisdictions in identifying the impact that opioids are having in your specific communities or jurisdictions. The second aspect of this program is to develop data-driven, coordinated responses to identify and address challenges resulting from opioid abuse and misuse that will ultimately improve public safety and long-term outcomes for children, youth, and their families who have been impacted. And so on your screen, you'll see 3 different links. One is to the funding detail announcement. The next one, or I should say different funding details. The next link is directly to the actual solicitation, and the last link is just for the FAQs. I'll be referring to parts of the solicitation during this presentation, so you can feel free to follow along that way by using these active links. So who is eligible? We have two categories under this program announcement. Category 1, implementing data-driven strategies and programs through strategic partnerships. This is open to applicants who are nonprofit or for-profit organizations, which includes tribal governments, as well as institutions of higher learning. Category 2, Opioid Affected Youth Initiative technical assistance is available to states, units of local government, and federally recognized tribal governments. So when submitting your application, please be sure to indicate the category you are applying under. So let's talk a little bit about those categories. Category 1 is a category that we will be awarding $1 million to 6 award recipients over a project period of 36 months to establish and convene a task force that will work together to identify specific areas of concern, including the types of opioids used and the reasons for that use, opioid use related to deaths, and opioids related to crimes committed by youth, including school referrals to law enforcement of youth involved in the usage or distribution of opioids. Successful applicants in Category 1 will also develop a collaborative approach to identify and respond to the impact that the opioid epidemic has had on children, youth, and their families by developing data sharing tools to respond to public safety concerns caused by the opioid crisis, identify types of opioids used, and identify the degree of opioid use among youth in the community and the specific impacts caused by the opioid crisis, as well as develop a response and determine the type of impact that opioids are having within that response. Applicants should address deliverables for both the planning phase and also the implementation phase of this category, and you can find more information on pages 7 and 8 of the solicitation. In addition, within this category, they will convene and establish the task force, which must include the following representatives. You'll want to ensure that you have representation from law enforcement, those in the education community, probation and community supervision, juvenile courts, mental health service providers, medical physicians, examiners, prosecutors, community-based organizations that address substance abuse disorders, child welfare agencies, first responders, and community health agencies. So once awarded, the TA provider as well as OJJDP will work with the grantee and their task force to develop data sharing agreements to collect and analyze data across stakeholders and to utilize that data to examine trends, public safety needs, gaps in service delivery and coordination, and also to strategize ways to improve the response to and the coordination of services for children, youth, and families impacted by opioid use disorders. SICE will also develop a final strategic plan. This strategic plan will be a working document that the TA provider as well as OJJDP will assist you with finalizing. It's a plan that we suspect will take up to a year to complete, and it's part of the planning phase. During this planning phase, you will have access to up to $300,000 of your award money in order to support your planning goals during the planning process and respond to any mandatory requirements on the grant award. You should also include with your application a logic model. We understand that it's a really quick turnaround time. In fact, applications are due in a little more than a week. And so the logic model can just be a very basic framework, and those who are awarded, we will work with you to further develop that model. Also, because of the short time frame to submit an application, Memoranda of understanding and data sharing agreements are not required with the application, but we will, of course, work with you once the award is made to establish those two deliverables. Category 2, Opioid Affected Youth Initiative Technical Assistance. So this category, we will provide over $1 million to one awardee to provide technical assistance to the different sites in Category 1. That technical assistance will involve developing data sharing agreements, helping the sites collect data and strategies and tools, helping the sites coordinate and facilitate their different partnerships and their relevant stakeholders, helping the sites analyze and interpret the data that they're collecting so that it identifies service needs and gaps, helping them develop their program models, which will include short and long-term outcome goals and measurements, and also helping them develop resources, tools, documents. This is going to be those best practices and those goals that will help support the sites during their implementation phase. Ultimately, the TA provider will also develop data collection tools and data sets that will help the sites in organizing and analyzing the data related to identifying the type of impact that opioids are having on children, youth, and their families within your targeted communities. The TA provider will develop tools and resources that will capture and disseminate information about effective policies and practices, as well as trends relevant to the grantees, stakeholders, and also to policy makers. There are 3 specific benchmarks that the TA provider will want to submit to the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention during the project period. Those 3 benchmarks are during the planning phase. This will be a report that the TA provider will submit to our office just to outline the initial assessment that they've done with the sites during the first year of planning. The second benchmark will be another report that the TA provider will want to submit as the site is beginning implementation. And the third benchmark is a report that the TA provider will submit to OJJDP post-implementation. So this is about 18 to 24 months into the project. The TA provider will submit a report outlining the data collection strategies, how things are going with their strategic partnerships, with their task force, and also any sort of effort on sustainability. Lastly, as a final report, the TA provider in Category 2 will submit a monograph, which can be a book or an article or white paper or even a digital tool that documents the work with the grantee throughout the entire project period from start to finish. Review criteria. And so applications for both categories must meet the basic minimum requirements. And so at that point, they will be evaluated, both categories, by peer reviewers. And those reviewers will be looking at the following. They will be looking at your description of the issue as described in your narrative. They'll be looking at the goals, the objectives, and the performance measures. They will be looking at and analyzing your project design and your plans for implementation. They'll be looking at your capabilities and your competencies, and they'll also be reviewing your budget. So you want to ensure that your budget is complete, that all costs in your budget are reasonable and allowable, and that you attach a budget narrative that demonstrates each cost category. So it gives a detailed narrative explanation of each cost category. You can find more information about review criteria on page 15 of the solicitation, and it will also talk about what your application should include. So a little bit more about the budget. We have a new budget form that we are using this year. And you want to ensure when you're submitting your application, you want to ensure that you are using the budget that is linked specifically in this solicitation, we just want to make sure that you're using the most current budget worksheet that we have available. Category 1 applicants should allocate about $10,000 in their travel budget. This will be used to support capacity building activities and other events, networking meetings, conferences that will be recommended by OJJDP or by the technical assistance provider. That concludes my portion of the webinar. We want to leave time for any questions or comments that you all may have. And so, William, I'll turn it back over to you.
Sorry, I was on mute there talking. My apologies, Kathy. Yes, thank you very much. And so for those of you who have questions, if you could just go ahead and take a few minutes to provide your questions in the chat pod. We will vet those questions to Kathy, and we will answer them shortly. And Kathy, it looks like we do have a couple of questions that have come in just regarding the solicitation and maybe the order. We provide those in the Q&A, so if you'd like to address that for everyone, you can do so there for the clarification of the solicitation and the description.
Thank you, William. I see the first question is about travel. So there is another question about eligibility. I'm not sure I understand that one, so I'll go to the one about travel. Should the TA provider host a meeting for grantees? How many meetings? That is an excellent question. I will say that it is not mandatory that the TA provider host a meeting for grantees. I think this process is going to be really intuitive. The TA provider will first do a needs assessment. So they'll go out to each site. They'll do an assessment about where they are and analyze any gaps and challenges. Once they conduct that assessment, they will come back to OJJDP and we'll talk about it. And out of those discussions, we will determine the best path forward. Sometimes that means more intensive one-on-one TA is needed, and sometimes that means the TA provider might want to propose to have a conference or to have a convening where they bring all of the grantees together. I think that if you are applying under Category 2 as a TA provider, then you'll want to conceptualize what that might look like, and you may want to propose in your application that you want to hold a convening, or you may want to conceptualize a different method for doing your TA. And so part of me wants to say we'll leave that up to you and how you want to respond to this solicitation, and the other part is going to be based upon a lot of collaboration. So I should also mention that these awards are cooperative agreements. They're not grants. And so cooperative agreements require substantial federal input. And so we, as the funding agency and as the federal partner in this work, will be working very closely with the TA provider and with the sites in Category 1 to determine the best way to respond to this crisis. And I hope that answers your question, Joyce. So the next question is OJJDP scheduling a new grantee meeting for grantees? Absolutely. We will have some way to meet with the new grantees, and most of those meetings are discussing federal administrative requirements, but we certainly will have a meeting, either a group conference call with the 6 sites or an individual call with the 6 sites as new applicants, just to get them familiar with the requirements. Is the new grantee meeting being scheduled for both Category 1 and Category 2 grantees? Yes, we will certainly have new grantee meetings with the sites awarded in Category 1 and also with the TA provider awarded in Category 2. Are there age restrictions for the target group? Typically our age our ages are 18 to 25, and so this is for youth who are impacted by the opioid epidemic, youth and their families and communities, and typically that's 18 to 25. I am going to, I should say, our associate administrators on the line, Kelly Blue. And so, Kelly, please feel free to come in or type a message in the chat box if I am wrong on that number, but I do believe it's typically 18 to 25. Can you please restate before we...
Oh, thanks, Kathy. It looks like Kelly's responding to the participant in the chat pod there.
Okay, awesome. Okay, can you please review and restate the 4 reports that Category 2 provider is expected to provide? Yes. So this is also in the solicitation. The solicitation actually does a much better job of being very specific on what those benchmarks are to provide. So you want to make sure that you are reading all of the guidance in the solicitation, but I will go back over those benchmarks in my notes. Give me 1 second while I find those. Okay, so this is the benchmarks or the 4 reports pertaining to the T provider. So the T provider will draft site-specific profiles of each grantee at 3 milestones. The first milestone is during the planning phase. The second milestone is at the beginning of implementation, which is going to be the beginning of year 2. The third milestone is 18 to 24 months into the project. The T provider will report on current outcomes, their data collection strategy, and their approach to sustainability. And the last benchmark is the final report, which will document the overall work with the grantee. And this is listed, this is outlined in great detail in the solicitation as well. So the next question. Provide more information about eligibility for profit organization. I'm not sure what you mean. If you could elaborate on that question. I will say that the eligibility requirement is listed on page 1 of the application. It is limited to, I believe, nonprofits. I'm going to go back on my slides. Just 1 second. So eligibility. Eligible applicants for Category 1 are limited to nonprofit and for-profit organizations. This includes tribal nonprofit and for-profit organizations as well as institutions of higher learning. Eligibility for Category 2 is limited to states, units of local government, and federally recognized tribal governments. Does the Category 1 grant have to provide services for adolescents? Can the services be primarily to children 0 to 10? So the age range is going to be 18 to 25 years old. Are all of the performance measures listed in Appendix A mandatory? Yes, the performance metrics are mandatory. And some performance metrics may be more applicable to your project than others, but when you do your reporting to OJJDP, you will be required to give a response for each performance measure. Will participants get a recording? Yes. The transcript will be available.
Yes, thanks, Kathy. I actually, for participants inside of the chat, I did provide a link to the YouTube page where the recording for today's presentation will be located. Sorry about that, Kathy. I just wanted to make sure that participants were aware that the link was posted inside the chat. The link is also available in the PDF version of the PowerPoint presentation too.
Thank you, William. So the next question is, year one is the planning year. The outcome of first year will dictate what the focus of the implementation will be. Should we speculate what that might look like in the project design, goals, et cetera? That's a very, very good question because you're right. Year one is the planning year, and so year 2 and 3 are really speculative at this point. And so for application purposes, if you are applying under Category 2, you want to remember that you are going to be working with OJJDP to govern this project and to provide guidance and direction to the sites. And so you'll have to imagine what this should look like, what a successful site should look like, what implementation should be in years 2 and 3, what a successful site will look like, and how your plan will be designed to ensure that level of success. And so you will have to speculate. And so it's okay to generalize to a certain extent and discuss what applicants should be bringing to the table and how you will make that happen. Are the core performance standards currently on the website? They should definitely, on the website. Are the core performance standards currently on the website, the current standards? They are, so the performance measures for this program are listed in the solicitation. I would just focus on the ones listed in the solicitation. But I will say that they should be on the NTTAC website as well. So they are in the solicitation. You really don't have to go to the NTTAC website, but if you have a question about the NTTAC website, you can email me privately offline. But all you need for a successful application is found in the solicitation. And I do believe that there's a link to NTTAC's website in the solicitation, and if not, there's definitely a link to their website at ojjdp.gov. So please discuss how the successful grantee would incorporate all of the performance measures included in the announcement. So each quarter you will receive a report. It is a standardized template. Each of the performance measures is listed in that report, and you will input your performance metrics, the responses to the performance measures in that report. So it's a standard template, and once you become an awardee, we will go over all of that with you, and your first report actually won't be due until you get a few months into the process. And so they have tutorials and instructional materials on how you would incorporate your performance measures. Can family members or youth be offered incentives or stipends to encourage participation on the task force? It depends. Typically, when it comes to incentives or stipends, we take that on a case-by-case basis. Sometimes they are not allowed, but it really depends on how they are framed with respect to the activity or the objective. So if the incentive or if the stipend is being offered as a direct result of a program activity that's connected to your performance metrics, that's connected to your goals and objectives, it might be allowable, but again, that's on a case-by-case basis. And so as this is a cooperative agreement, that's going to come out of a lot of discussion with the program office. Will there be subgranting in this project? Subgrants are allowed, subawards can be made, and so A Category 1 site can certainly decide that they would like to subaward a percentage of their award funds to a consultant or a vendor or a subrecipient to provide a service or a service or an activity. So that is an allowable cost pending OJJDP approval. Can dollars unspent in year 1 be used in years 2 and 3? Yes, absolutely. And so with the application, you will submit a very basic budget. We will work with you. Budgets are modified and revised many, many different times because things change and sometimes the direction of the project might change. And so you can certainly transfer dollars from one year to the next. Is sending task force members to other cities to learn best practices allowable? That's a very good question. That will come out of discussions with the program office as we move forward and work with each grant recipient. If the training is necessary and if the training has been something that was advised by the TA provider, that is a cost that could be improved, but it's on a case-by-case basis. Do people applying for Category 2 also need to provide a logic model? Yes. For Category 2, how many awards will be issued? One award for Category 2. The grant solicitation says Category 1 is for states, units of local government, or tribal governments. Is that correct? Let me read directly from the solicitation before I answer that. Eligibility. Eligible applicants for Category 2, I'm reading verbatim, are limited to nonprofit and for-profit organizations, including tribal nonprofit and for-profit organizations, and institutions of higher education, including tribal institutions of higher education. For-profit organizations must forego any profit or management fee. And so that is the eligibility for Category 2. What is the anticipated time frame for award announcements since the projects are anticipated to begin October 1? That's an excellent question. I would say contact me offline. I don't know if Kelly's still on the line. I don't know when well, I'll just take my best guess. It's typically in August, but that is my best guess. If anyone would like a more definitive time frame, you can feel free to email me offline, and I will do my best to get you a better time frame. But they are typically August, and so it's really quick between the time the award is made and the time that the grantee has to accept it and begin on October 1st. For Category 2, can the grantor do a subaward? Absolutely, sure, yes. The TA provider, if they have an expert who they would like to do some sort of analysis or help with sustainability or data collection, they can certainly subaward a portion of their award funds to hire an expert if they would like, pending OJJDP approval. I think I covered all of the questions. Please let me know if I'm forgetting anything or if you still have a question that you'd like to get in.
Thanks, Kathy. It looks like we do have a couple more questions pouring in, so we'll just give participants a few more minutes to provide their questions.
Sure. Page 19 requires Category 2 respondents to highlight their experience, capability, capacity to manage subawards, including details on their system for fiscal accountability. Are Category 2 respondents expected or required? No. So there's no expectation as a Category 2 recipient that you would manage subawards. No expectation at all. However, I will offer that as part of our federal compliance initiatives, part of our award monitoring, these questions will be asked. We'll want to know that you have the capacity. You might not actually have a subaward or a subrecipient, but we will ask that you have the capacity to monitor, to manage, and to sustain that. And so it is not a mandate, but the question might be asked at some point if you're chosen for random monitoring and auditing, programmatic auditing. Formatting question, is the project narrative the only document to be double-spaced? So I am not an expert on that, but I will say there's a link in the presentation to the funding page and to the FAQ. And if you follow that link within the presentation, it will talk about all of the requirements for grants.gov. It'll talk about spacing requirements. I think there's a page limit requirement, and all of that information is outlined at our website. How does the unit of government register online with SAM? Instructions are changing as of June 29. What registration should be used? So I'll give two answers to that question. The first answer is, and I apologize for sounding repetitive, but it's on our website. I would just follow the page, the link that's listed in the presentation for the FAQ. It's listed there. I also have additional information that we just received. I think a blast email went out about SAM registrations, and so you can email me offline. If you can't find it on our website, if you can't find it at grants.gov, you can email me and I'll send it to you about the SAM registration. And yes, NTTAC, well, I guess that's a question for William. Will participants get a list of attendees?
If the participant that has asked that, if they could contact the OJJDP Help Desk so that we can maybe speak with them a little bit more to get further clarification on their question. The Help Desk information is located in the PDF of your handouts, and I'll also go through those towards the end of our presentation. But if that participant could please just contact us at OJJDP's Help Desk. Actually, Kathy, would you mind if I just flash the slide really quickly?
Sure. Please do.
Okay. Yeah, and so if the participant could just contact us here at the OJJDP Help Desk to talk a bit more in detail regarding their request. Thank you.
Thanks, William. I guess I don't know why I didn't think of this before. I'm going to go back up to the links because I referenced them a couple of times. And so the funding details, this link will have, it's comprehensive, so you can find the program announcement, the solicitation, FAQs, I think information on this webinar, everything will be listed under funding details. If you just wanted to go directly to the solicitation, you can use the second link. And then FAQs is the third link. And FAQs is going to talk a lot about the different parts of the application process, like how do you apply, where do you go, what to include. And so these are 3 reference points. Is $10,000 travel apply to Category 2 and for all years or per year? That's an excellent question. So in the initial budget is going to look different from the budgets going forward. So the initial budget submitted as an applicant is going to be different than it will be for a second-year grantee or a third-year grantee. And so the initial budget is we just gave $10,000. It's a nice round number. I would suggest that Category 2 and Category 1 applicants set aside money in their travel budget. $10,000 is a nice round number to start. Once you are awarded, that number may change as you really get into the details of the grantees. For example, we don't know which states will be awarded, and so you may have grantees that will require travel to the West Coast and you live on the East Coast, or there may be a conference in the Midwest and you live in the upper north. And so a lot of what's going to be in that travel category is going to be speculative. And so $10,000 is a nice round number. And so Category 1 and Category 2 sites, travel will be required. And so that's a good starting point. And so, William, there's a question about where can they access the recording?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, and just to remind folks that the recording for the webinar will be on OJJDP NTTAC's YouTube page. We'll be able to have that uploaded within the weekend. That will allow for you folks to have access to the recording of this presentation. And I provided the link in the chat, but I can repost that link as well for folks so that they have access to the OJJDP's NTTAC's YouTube channel as well. Okay, and I went ahead and I reposted that location for the YouTube page.
Okay. Would you please address the expectations for the impact analysis? Please elaborate on that question. Thank you. I just want to make sure I understand the question. Do you have a question about the expectations for the impact of the funding? And so if you could help me answer the question by elaborating in more detail about what you mean, and if you are referring to a specific part of the application or a specific part of the solicitation rather, please cite the page number, and we will go directly to that part of the solicitation to help address your question. Would OJJDP expect a full research impact analysis on outcomes? I think that's subjective. So we want to make sure that we can demonstrate the federal investment in this project. And so that is largely going to come in the form of a monograph or report that displays the impact. And that's going to involve a lot of strategies with regards to coordinating the strategic stakeholders, the data collection, and really analyzing data in a meaningful way so that perhaps this could be something that is a replicable model or something that is fully sustainable should other communities want to tap into the research that was developed. And so I'm not sure what you mean by full research. We don't expect that. You would have to get privacy statements and things like that But I think it's going to be subjective, and we might have to talk a little bit more about that offline. And so a logic model really is just an illustration of how you're going to respond to the goals of the solicitation. It's just, and it could be a very basic illustration of that. And so it's just a basic framework illustrating the different points and the goals of the solicitation and of your proposal. And we just want people to keep it very basic. It's typically one page. It's typically just a model on one page. If you have additional curiosity about what a logic model is, there are examples of a logic model. I'm going to go to the solicitation. I'll tell you what page of the solicitation that is. On page 19 of the solicitation, there's a link where you can see sample logic models, if that's helpful. Okay, page 9, bullet 4, in terms of the impact question. So let me go to page 9. So page 9, bullet 4, reads, analyze and document the impact of implemented cross-site coordinated service delivery models and programs on the desired outcome of finding solutions for the wide-ranging negative impact of opioid addiction on the public safety of children, youth, and families. And this is category 2. And so as a Category 2 technical assistance provider, you will be meeting in person and over the phone with each one of the sites. Each one of the sites will have a lead person who's responsible for convening and also creating a task force with members of all of the strategic stakeholders that we mentioned earlier in the webinar, and they're also mentioned in the solicitation. These are going to be your first responders, emergency room workers, representatives from the education community, from the social service agencies, from the health department. And so the TA provider is going to analyze and document all of that. Analyze and document the impact of this cross-section of coordinated service providers. Analyze and impact, is the task force convening regularly? Are they convening in a meaningful way to address the components of the solicitation? Are they developing tools, strategies, and data to respond effectively to the goals of the solicitation? Are their delivery models responsive? Are their programs responsive? Are they incorporating service delivery within the model? Are they finding solutions for the impact of the opioid addiction? It's kind of part of the process through working with the different sites, through conference calls, through site visits, through monitoring them. You're going to analyze and document the impact that these projects are having in Category 1. Please let me know if that answers fully your question. If it does not fully answer your question, please contact me offline, and we can continue to talk more about that bullet point on page 9. What is the definition of opioid-affected youth? Youth who are affected by opioids. Youth who are either using opioids themselves, youth who are selling opioids, youth who are purchasing opioids for themselves or for others, youth who are the children or are being cared for parent or guardian who is addicted to opioids. Those are all definitions of what I would consider a child who's been impacted by substance abuse, and in this case, it will be opioids. I have a nice graphic of our system for youth intervention. May I include it in the narrative? You can include it in the narrative. You can also include it as a separate attachment. I love separate attachments. Sometimes a person may submit a 50-page narrative, and I have to scroll through the narrative to find the different facets of the application. I would say let the narrative be the narrative. If you have other visuals or other supporting documents, you can do them as separate attachments. And so if you have a nice graphic, you can reference it in the narrative and maybe do a separate attachment and just call it, let the file name be realistic so that we can go directly to that file and look at it together in the reviewers. So as long as the file name is realistic, if you reference it in your narrative and then there's a realistic file name directly to the reference you made of it in the narrative, then that will let the reviewer know to go to that specific attachment. But I find, especially for reviewers, because reviewers are going to have to review dozens of applications, and sometimes our reviewers serve on more than one panel, I would just say let the narrative be the narrative, and any supporting documents, make sure that they're separate attachments. Yes, I am the OJJDP staff member who will be managing this project. I have other colleagues who will be assisting, but you can submit your questions to me and we will get back with you. The solicitation said no other attachments other than the ones listed. So So if the solicitation does say that, if they're only saying we just want the narrative, the budget, the logic model, and the abstract, and letters of support, and so on and so forth, then I would defer to the solicitation. And the reason why I say defer to the solicitation is because we want you to be able to get through grants.gov. We want you to meet those basic minimum requirements, and so just go by what the solicitation says. After you meet those basic minimum requirements, as you're going through peer review and should you be awarded, then we can have those discussions about what other types of documents might be necessary to submit. But just go according to the solicitation. I don't want to throw anyone off. And so if we don't have any more questions, I believe that William has a few reminders that he wants to go through.
Yes, thank you, Kathy. Yeah, I appreciate it. So thank you again, Kathy, for the great discussion today. Just wanted to remind everyone that you can contact OJJDP or NTTAC via the Help Desk by following the contact information on this slide. Again, these slides are available for download in the handouts pod, so the contact information will be accessible there. And again, as a reminder, the webinar recording will be archived in approximately 1 week after today's presentation on OJJDP's NTTAC YouTube channel. And then for the transcript of the event and supporting materials, please contact OJJDP's Help Desk. Please take a few minutes to review this disclaimer here. And lastly, we would appreciate it if you could please take about 5 minutes to complete the feedback survey. Again, thank you all for joining us today. We, Kathy, have about 5 more minutes, and so if folks have more questions, did you want to address them or just tell them to maybe contact you after the webinar?
Thanks, William. They can contact myself or NTTAC. Sometimes we get fielded questions directly. The respondent, the applicant may go directly to NTTAC with a question, or they can email me. And my email address is kathy.mitchell@ ojp.usdoj.gov.
Okay, great.
If you didn't write that down, I'm sure it's on the OJJDP website. It's probably OJJDP website. Or like I said before, if you submit a question to OJJDP TTA, they will get that question directly to me.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you very much, Kathy. We appreciate it. And again, the contact information is here. Thank you all for joining us, and have a great afternoon.
The host has left the meeting, so at this time, the meeting will come to an end. Thank you and goodbye.